Hey Banditos, welcome to another episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Mike Farah.
I'm Warren Phillips.
And before we get to today's guest, we want to thank our sponsor, Tomorrow's Publishing, TWOMORROWS.com. Check out their fine publications, support them, because by supporting them, you support us. But now we want to get to our guest, Joe Rubinstein, or Joseph if you want to be formal. We sat down with Joe a few weeks ago and had a great interview with him. You may know him from basically everything. He has inked so many comic books over so many pencilers that it is just astounding. And we get into how he got into his career, you know, who he loved to work with the most, doing the Marvel Handbook, where he inked virtually all of the entries, and so many other projects.
Yeah, if you talk about the Cal Ripken of inking, just because of longevity and all the projects he's worked on, he would be right up there. And he's also a phenomenal inker as well. It's not like that he inks fast, but he inks so well, and so many big name artists want him on their books, and it's a credit to him and the work that he puts into it.
Yeah, so let's get to it. This is Joe Rubinstein.
And today we are absolutely thrilled to have Joe Rubinstein with us. How are you, sir?
Hello, I'm good.
I'm going to kick it off the same way we do with everyone else, and that is to ask how you first discovered comics.
I emigrated from Israel when I was 5 years old, and my older cousin had a bunch of comic books, I think mostly the Superman family. And since I couldn't read the language or speak the language, I guess I could understand comic books, and I suppose I got enthralled by them. And, you know, like a lot of kids, I probably had crayons and lined paper and did my own comic books. And then when I was 11 years old, I started to go to the Art Students League of New York to study to be an artist.
Were there particular, other than Superman, were there maybe any particular comics that you, or heroes that you were fond of at the time?
I don't think so, but I remember my father brought home a bunch of comic books once, and there was like creepy #3 in it. And I was absolutely blown away by Reed Crandall and Al Williamson and Gray Mar. I'd never seen black and white comics before, I guess. And they were just magnificent. And then around, I guess, 1970, I saw, they came out with 2 books, Amazing, could be amazing. I don't remember the names now, but it was like 2 split books, like Dr. Doom and the Inhumans and Black Widow and somebody else, you know. And I bought those, and that was pretty amazing looking stuff. And then I guess it just naturally went over to Kirby and all the rest of the books.
So from our research, it seems like you broke into the industry through Continuity Studios, which is a place we're familiar with from other interviews. It seems like a really kind of a perfect learning environment for someone getting into the industry. Did you find that was a great nurturing way to break in?
You mean perfectly awful, perfectly abusive, perfectly damaging? Yeah, it was all those things. No, it was not a great place. It was a lot of pressure. Dick Giordano was a wonderful, wonderful human being. He definitely balanced the malevolent evil that was present elsewhere in the studio. So, I mean, you know, it's whatever it is. I started to work there when I was 13 years old, so 1971. And it was only 3 rooms that they rented of a full floor. And if a client showed up in the first room, I had to leave to the 3rd room because there wasn't enough room for everybody. And the great part about it is that I had access to Neil and Dick's files. So it's like, oh, look, they've been looking at Stan Drake and Tom Sawyer and Joe Kubert and all that stuff. Because, you know, the only comic books that you could find were the ones on the stands, or maybe if you found some used stuff, but not necessarily much of it. And so I started to understand what it was that Neil Adams was doing and how he got his style because of the people who influenced him. And Dick was great because even though he would have deadlines always, of course. If I had a question, he would stop and show me what to do and teach me, and that was great. The other guy, he couldn't be bothered. So, and then by the time I was 15, I became the official art assistant. So I was helping Dick out on jobs and various jobs around the studio, and I started to assist people who were renting space there, like Russ Heath and Wally Wood. And then I sort of, well, Bob McLeod was working at Marvel Comics in the production department. Bob's, I think, 7 years older than I am. So I'm like 15, he's 22, and we're looking at Tom Palmer's work and everybody's work, and we're sort of teaching each other how to be inkers. And then when I was 17, I got my first job freelancing at DC. And then when I was 19, I got my first job at Marvel, which was the 2-in-1 Avengers annual that became the basis for all those Thanos movies.
How'd those do? No.
They're around.
They're so did you know early on that you wanted to be an inker, or was that kind of through your work with Dick Giordano and in the early years that you want to do that specifically?
No, like anybody else. I wanted to be a penciler. I wanted to be the artist. Mm-hmm. But then I read, there was a wonderful magazine Roy Thomas used to put out called Alter Ego. And there was an interview of Gil Kane, who certainly was one of the greatest comic book artists who ever lived. And he said that he should have been an inker first to learn the business before he went on to penciling. I went, oh, okay, I'll be an inker first. And there I have my favorite inker in the world in the next room. So that'll help. And I started practicing. And then this guy showed up, Mike Netzer. His name was Nasser at the time. Mm-hmm. And he was very much in the Neil Adams school of penciling. I was trying very hard to be in the Dick Giordano school of inking. I asked him one day if I could make some Xeroxes and work on his samples. And he said, just ink the real thing. I went, really? And so I did. And he brought it to his editor, Jerry Conway. And Jerry hired Mike, and then he hired me. And, you know, appropriately enough, the job was called Tales of the Great Disaster. And then Mike and I were teamed up for a while together, and Mike started to wander Palestine, and I got other work. So
we had a chance to interview him last year, and interesting life he has. I mean, just a fraction of it had to do with comics, and I would love to just interview him again. Just tell us about everything else you did, because he was like, yeah, I stopped doing comics, and then I wandered the world. I was like, oh, okay.
Well, more like the Middle East, but sure.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's just the way it was going on. It was like,
yeah. And so he was a Kurd, and I assume Muslim or a Kurd's Christian, I'm not sure. And then he became a devout born-again Christian, and then he became a Jew, and I've been waiting for him to become a sun worshiper, but I guess he stopped there at being a Jew. And he lives in Israel and kibbutzim, and he does all kinds of weird artwork for his own pleasure. So
good for him. But you broke in creatively with him. What made him a good partner in terms of your first work inking, or collaboration, I should say?
Well, because he was trying to do Neil. I was trying to do Neil. He was, but Dick was inking Neil. I was trying to ink like Dick. So we were just like a natural team, you know. And I look back at the stuff and I think, well, I've got some potential, but it's not like it's really good inking. But we were getting together, and he was growing and I was growing. The thing about being an inker is that you don't have to know what you're doing for the first 2 or 3 years, because you can hide behind the penciler if they're tight enough. And so Mike, when you're an inker, if you have a tight penciler, you can hide behind it. You don't really have to know what you're doing. You can just sort of follow the lines. And if you really care about what you're doing, there's all kinds of information you can pick up off the ground, like rocks. It's like, oh, I never knew I could do that, or that's the way he does that, or something. I found, at least from my experience, that I was very fast at the beginning, Then I had to think about what I was doing, and I got slower. And then when I knew what I was doing, I got faster again. And while my goal was never to be fast, I happened to be fast. And I've talked to other inkers about this. After a couple of years, it's sort of like, well, how come every job isn't better than the last one? And then I realized it does take 30 years to become Joe Kubert, you know, and Barry Smith, he would draw page 2 through 22 in Conan, and then he'd draw page 1, because he figured by the time he got to 22, he was better. So he wanted to put his best effort on the first page, you know, and, you know, so, and the interesting thing is, to me anyway, is I would never let anybody watch me work. I'm down in my studio and nobody can watch me, because I kind of felt like the imposter syndrome. I would have all these comic books in front of me, and I was looking at the way this arm was done and that arm was done and that one, then figure out how to make it into the thing I'm inking. And so I felt like I wasn't really being a legitimate inker. And then after about 2 or 3 years, I thought to myself, well, wait a second. If I gave you the reference that I'm looking at, you couldn't do my job, so I must know something. And now I'm in comic book conventions with thousands of people wandering past me and talking to me and whatever, and I'm just inking and inking and inking. So it's really just the opposite of that coin now.
When did you become confident in your ability? Like, when did you think like, oh, I'm good. I got this now.
I wonder how many people actually know that moment. I was inking something and I went to reinforce a line. And then when I looked at it, I realized that I had missed it by like a 32nd of an inch or something. And I said, oh, I'm a real inker now, because it didn't matter. It wasn't like every single precious line had to be absolutely. Now, mind you, there is the more contemporary school these days, which is every single precious line has to be right on the money. Mm-hmm. And, you know, some of them are really nice. Some of them work, but I think more often than not, they kind of kill the life of the pencils. Because the thing that I enjoy is bravado, is confidence, is a bold stroke. It's like I recognized one day that my drawing wasn't good enough. So I had to slow down and be more careful about how I was inking something. But I had to be more bold and direct in how I was doing and not trace it. So in effect, I was going 2 different directions at the same time. And people, as a matter of fact, a guy named, an inker named Wade von Graubacher came up to me the other day at a convention and talked to me about, he didn't understand what inkers did until he saw my Hulks with Sal Buscema. And he said, you have such a confident line. And I recognized that Tom Palmer was one of my heroes. And Tom had a wonderful, fluid, bold, confident line. And I decided to do a job like that. And when it was all done, it was awful. It was sloppy. It was forced. Tom Palmer doesn't say, today I'm going to be Tom Palmer. He just is. And I got to a point, as a matter of fact, Joe Quesada, who I discovered, I found him in a lighting store once. So Quesada's putting out a blog, I think. And the first one was about me. And he said how he was over at my place and I was looking through pages and I was sort of throwing them around and he was horrified. And I went, no, you can't be afraid of these things. You know, I think I bit a piece out of the corner or something. You know, it was like, it doesn't matter. It's no one line is the perfect thing. If you screw up that one line, the job doesn't fall apart, you know? And he told me that he said, okay, I'm going to be that way. And of course he wasn't until about 10 years into it. And he went, oh, hey, I don't care anymore. Not about the quality of the work, but about the preciousness of everything. And if you look at my heroes like Joe Kubert, Alex Raymond, you know, so the wonderful Frazetta, the wonderful brush men, they're just throwing it down. They have the it's sort of, you know, I didn't learn to drive till I was 50 because I lived in New York and I wasn't gonna learn to drive. And then I moved to LA. And now when I drive, it's like, it's scary at the beginning. You don't know what you're doing. You hit things, you go on curbs, you get too close to stuff. And then after whatever, 5 or 10 years, it's like, you just know that doing this is not going to hit that car, and going that way is just going to work, you know? So it's the same thing with inking. You're afraid, you don't know how it works until one day it's just second nature to you.
You remember what project that was where you
Which
were
one?
off by a 32nd of a inch?
No, I don't. I remember what project I did that was horrible and sloppy. I'm not going to tell you, but the interesting thing is, I didn't remember. I must have blocked it out. I didn't remember for years what that project was, other than I knew I'd done it. And then somebody had me sign it at a convention. I opened it up and says, "Oh, this is the terrible job." I'd completely forgotten it, for my own sake, I guess. So.
Well, I wanted to move to a specific project, and hopefully it's not that project, and one you're well known for, which is the Wolverine miniseries with Chris Claremont and Frank Miller. How did your involvement in that come about? Was that something where Frank picked you? Was it an editor that you came? Was it you throw your hat in the ring?
Yeah, so I'm working at Continuity Studios, and I'm living at home. So for my age, which is 14, 15, 16, I'm making a bunch of money because I don't have to pay rent or anything. I'm not like rich, but I have money. And Frank was this very skinny kid who looked somewhat like Ichabod Crane, from Vermont. And he was doing these little 6 pages in the back of weird war stories or something. And so when he would show up at the studio and we became friendly, I would offer to buy him lunch. So for all of you out there who love Frank Miller, you owe me, because he'd be dead today without me. So and so Frank would show me his pages as he started to work for Marvel, and I would correct his anatomy for him. Now, I'm not overstating. I didn't draw his pages. I didn't lay out his pages. I didn't do anything other than move some biceps where they needed to be. So I think the reason I inked Frank's first cover on Daredevil is because he didn't know who was going to be the inker. So he trusted me, and I did it. And then Klaus, of course, did the rest of the book. And then a couple of issues later, I did the interiors of the Hulk Daredevil issue, and Klaus did the cover. So I guess it's only fair. So in those days, you had to live in the New York City tri-state area to get work. There was no FedEx, or if there was, I didn't know about it. No internet, all that sort of stuff. So you had to pretty much hand in your pages, whether it was take a train from Connecticut or from Brooklyn. And so we all kind of knew each other. I mean, again, I was like the kid. I'm like 13 when they're 20, 22. And, but so I knew Frank, and he walked up to me at Marvel. You know, when you hand in the job, you go to Marvel and maybe you hang around for a while because you don't want to just go right back home. And maybe there's some people you want to talk to, and maybe there's some editors you want to, like, hey, look at my latest job. And Frank walked up to me and said, "We're doing this new Wolverine miniseries. You want to do it?" I went, "Yeah." Okay.
That was easy.
I mean, who knew it had legs? You know, who knew Wolverine is very, very good to me? You know. So but the truth of the matter is I thought, you know, Klaus Janson was Giordano's protege. And then he went on to ink his own stuff, and I became Dick's assistant. Simultaneously working up at the studio were Terry Austin and Bob Wyacek, primarily working with Dick and doing backgrounds for people like Tex Blaisdell or whoever. And Leighton sort of wandered in at one point. So Dick and Wally Wood kind of spawned a whole wave of new inkers coming into the business. So I thought what Klaus was doing on Frank was perfection. It was just what it should be. And I look forward to every issue of Daredevil, to the point that I read it first, and then I went looking at it, because if I looked at it while I read it, I'd be distracted from the story. But I would go back and admire what Klaus was doing. So Klaus was given by Frank full tight pencils. And Klaus being Klaus, he still altered them according to his style, but he was given full pencils. I was given layouts, which means it's a lot sketchier, A lot more details are left ambiguous for me to flesh out. And so consequently, it looked nothing like Frank's Daredevil. And because I thought Frank's Daredevil was perfect, I didn't like what I did at all. I thought it was all wrong. It was the best I could do. It was all I could figure out to do, but I didn't think it was any good. And when people would say to me, we really love your Daredevil, I would say, thank you for 25 years and not argue with them. And then after about 25 years, I looked at it and went, oh, this isn't so bad. So I don't know what Daredevil pages sell for, but one of the Wolverine pages just sold for $156,000. I saw another one on sale for $125,000. None of which do I get. I suspect if you could possibly collect all the original art to one issue of Wolverine, it would probably be in the millions. And the cover to Daredevil #1, Wolverine #1, was voted one of the 100 best covers of all time, and was recently in a museum show in Seattle, Washington, and it was insured for $350,000, which of course means I can't afford me. So.
Well, it deserves all of those accolades. And, I wonder, and you referred to this already while you were doing the project. I mean, did you have any clue that it would, blow up the way it did and become so consequential a work?
No. And it's the same thing. I worked on the X-Men 266, which is the introduction of Gambit. And he was a guy with a long coat and a big stick. Okay, so what? And so you can never tell. But it's sort of like, okay, so tell us, Miss Olivier, what was it like, Olivier de Havilland, what was it like working on Gone with the Wind? It was a job. We did it. We came in, we did our job, we had lunch, we went home. It was a job. We did it, And it's like, I'm doing the best I can because I feel an obligation to my penciler for sure. And I don't want to spend the vast majority of my life sitting in a room alone with nothing to be proud of. And I also want to get the next job because what happened to Rubinstein? You can't ink anymore. So I just did the best I could. It came out. I knew it was popular because people had me signing it like crazy at San Diego Con one year. And that was it. And only a couple of months ago did I reread it. And I went, oh, this is good. It's a good story. I understand why people like it. I mean, I was at a convention this weekend and there was a copy of it for sale for $300, #1. Another one for $225, $400. It's like, wow. And also, the thing is 41 years old. So I guess it's an antique collector's item on top of being the first Wolverine miniseries. So
That's pretty crazy. I mean, wow.
Unaffordable to us.
Yeah, totally.
Mhm.
So I want to ask about something else you worked on, the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. Did you know what a massive undertaking that was going to be when you started it? And did you ink the entire thing?
Well, all I knew, see, I'm kind of responsible for getting myself that job because there used to be a magazine called Comic Scene edited by Bob Greenberger, who went on to be an editor at Marvel at DC. And inkers get no respect, right? So I went to Greenberger and I went, when are you going to do an article about inkers? When are you something to explain what inkers do? Because nobody understands it and they're tracers and, oh, you do the colors and all that. And finally he said, okay, we're going to do an article about inkers. We're going to do an interview and it's going to be you, Bob Layton, Tom Palmer, and Klaus Janson. And if I remember right, like Dennis Cowan wandered in at some point. And what they did was they gave us a drawing of the Hulk, like Mike Sack, and then the four of us inked it, and they reproduced all four of them on one page with the pencil in the middle, very faded pencil, so you really can't see it. And Mark Grunwald, who was an editor at Marvel, who desperately loved comic books and wanted to make them make sense, came up with this idea to do this encyclopedia to standardize things, but to sell it to the fans to pay for it. So it's not just an in-house thing. So when Mark saw that my inking of it was the closest to what was intended, he said, hey, I've got this encyclopedia we're doing. Take these 3 pages and ink them. They're just full page pinups, and bring them back. And I think one was Ron Wilson, maybe 2 were Ron Wilson's work, but I don't remember who the 3rd one was. And I inked it and I brought it to him and he said, okay, this is good. Well, how many do you want? I went, all of them. Why would you say anything else? I'll take all of them. And one, it's the greatest gig an inker ever had, because I had all these different wonderful artists to work with. One big shot, right? And I would go to people who never ever got inked by anybody else, like Joe Kubert and John Severn. Will Eisner turned me down, and say, hey, listen, we're doing this book. Can you just draw a page? I mean, I remember calling up Brian Boland in England and not understanding the time difference, and woke him up at 1 a.m. Oh, he's having coffee, he said, but they were up at 1 a.m. I said, could you draw this thing for me? I want to ink it. And matter of fact, the only work that I'm aware of that Kurt Swan ever did for Marvel Comics was one of those pinups. And it was the Guardian, who is Marvel's Superman. So it was brilliant casting, you know. And so I make the joke that because I've inked something like 425 different pencilers, I've inked literally every character Marvel Comics has, and a bunch of DCs, because I worked on the Justice League and all that other stuff, that I have the Guinness World Record for the most collaborations ever, if it exists, which it doesn't. But I keep reading Guinness World Record holder Joe Rubinstein. It's like, well, I have it, but it doesn't exist. So then I wrote Guinness. I said, well, I did this thing. It's the biggest collaboration ever. And they said, no, we're busy counting how many nickels can go up a guy's nose. So so I'm really not in it. But if it existed, I'm in it. And it's great. But it's funny. I spent this was on and off for 20 years. And it was always a big figure. And then when I had to go ink a page with a head on it, I couldn't quite remember how to do it right, because I just forgotten what it takes.
Which artist did you enjoy inking the most in that project?
Well, I don't know about that project, but I mean, the guys, one of the artists I love inking wasn't even in it, which was Gene Colan. But I love inking the guys who know how to draw. John Buscema, Garcia Lopez, Gene Colan. Kirby wasn't in it either. So I don't want anybody I have to fix. I want, because when I ink John Buscema's stuff, I mean, John, he was a demigod. So I had to rise to the occasion and try and give it the power and fluidity of John's pencils. And as a matter of fact, I'm told that a bunch of those Marvel Universe figures I did with John, he kept the rest of his life. I don't know if it was for me or for him, but he kept them the rest of his life. I also had to ink Joe Kubert, which hadn't worked for Marvel for decades, if ever, that I'm aware of. But so like I said, I solicited people. I would just call up Brian Boland and Garcia Lopez and Alex Toth, who said yes. And then the stupid, not that editor, but another editor screwed it up. So he got mad and walked away, but that was Toth. He got mad about everything. And yeah, so at one point I pretty much had inked everybody in the business, but then, all the new crowd showed up and I became a legend, which means highly revered and unemployed. So.
What do you think? Well, you already referred to this a little bit or talked about it a little bit, but what makes a good rapport between a penciler and an inker? And is it ever any kind of verbal communication where a penciler will ask you to ink in such a way, or you will talk to a penciler and say, I'm going to do this? Is that work for you?
Well, I mean, I really, really, really want to please the penciler. I don't want to hear that guy said, oh no, Joe Rubinstein's inking me again. I want to be part of the team. And I view it as a relay race. And this guy just established the writer to the penciler to the inker. And if the penciler hands me the stuff and I go, I don't like what you're doing. I'll start running in that direction. There are plenty of fantastic artists who do exactly that. Alcala, Rudy Nebres, Tony DiZaniga, all my heroes, but they don't care what's in front of them. They just ink it the way they ink it. And I think that's sort of disrespectful, because if I drew something, I don't want you to change it into what you do. I'd like you to make it better than what I did, hopefully. So I have forgotten the question. You're asking me, who do I like to work on? The people who draw.
Sort of the rapport. What
Right,
makes
oh, yeah,
a good rapport
right,
between
right,
a
okay.
penciler and an
So
inker?
I don't have to know the person personally. I don't care to. Jose Garcia Lopez, one of the nicest, greatest guys, humble, the artist. I know Jose. We hug. John Byrne, who I think I make a very good team with. I don't talk to him. I don't need to talk to him. But the artwork is good. Now, when I mentioned earlier the Gil Kane interview in Alter Egos, why I became an inker, Gil Kane and I hated each other. Gil Kane did something I shan't go into that made me decide to hate him. But I would gladly ink him the rest of my life if I just didn't have to talk to him. On the other hand, when I did the Wolverine series, I would call up Frank, go, what did you want in panel 3? Hey, panel 7, what's that mean? It's like when you thought it was safe enough to answer the phone, it was Rubinstein again, And when I would start with a new person, a new penciler, I would warn them. I say, I'm going to try to do the best I can, but it's probably going to take me 2 to 3 issues to really figure out how to do you right. But I would call them up and I'd introduce myself and I'd say, who's your favorite artist? Who are your influences? Do you ink? What do you ink with? What inker did great on you? What inker did crappy on you? Are you more of a brush guy, more of a pen guy? And Adam Hughes said I was the first guy who ever did that to him, because he was always the guy who called up the inker to talk about it, right? But I just want to do it well, and inking is very boring. It's like it's all black and it's following some lines. That can get dull really fast. So how do I make it interesting? By trying to get into the head of the penciler. Oh, what did they want there? Oh, I'd never do it that way, but that's interesting. Well, that's what they want, as long as it fits in with the internal logic of the job. It's like I inked 3 6-page Spider-Man Wolverine pieces over Eric Larson and Marvel Presents or something. And they put it together into a collection, and they left my name off of it because they didn't think anybody but Eric worked on it. And then when I did Bill Sienkiewicz's first job was Moon Knight, the back of the Hulk, they left my name off of it because they thought this guy inked it. And then we did this thing called Heroes for Hunger, which was a benefit book for African relief. And I asked Starlin and Wrightson, see, in comic books, you don't say Jim and Bernie, you say Starlin and Wrightson because there's too many Jims and too many everybody, right? So Starlin and Wrightson were putting the thing together. And I said, well, who I'd really love to ink, who I've never inked before, is Garcia Lopez. And they came to me and says, okay, we got somebody for, is it Garcia Lopez? And says, no, it's Joe Kubert. And I did a spit take. It's like, what? Because he's my favorite artist ever, comic book artist ever. And I was terrified. And I started to ink this thing and I was just tightening up. I was just too intimidated by this stuff. And luckily, because of the deadline, I had like a week before I had to get back to it. So I got back to it and I inked it, and I thought I did a pretty credible job. And then Marshall Rogers called me up after the book came out and he said, hey, something's wrong. These 2 pages say that you inked them, but it's obviously Kubert inked them. I went, no, that was me. I couldn't do it without Kubert's pencils underneath me, my inks, but yeah, no, that was me.
Well, that's a great compliment.
Oh, sure. Well, okay. So pre-internet. So I send Kubert Xeroxes of these pages, and it's like throwing a feather into a wishing well. Like, And finally I couldn't stand it anymore. And I called him up. I said, "Hey, Joe, did you get the Xerox?" He says, "Yeah, what'd you think?" Says, "All in all, you didn't do badly." It was like, it's like, oh no. And then a couple of months later, I run into Adam and Andy Kubert, and I tell them the story, and they say, "That's like a rave for our father." I went, "Oh, okay, I feel better now." So
It's all relative.
Yeah, right.
they were his relatives, yes.
So I would love to know what gets you excited about a project. Is it the inker? Is it the character story?
No, it's a penciler. I mean, I don't know what the story is, especially nowadays when there's no lettering on the pages. And I don't know how it fits into anything else, but if they say, "Okay, Garcia Lopez has drawn a dead man job for you," it's like, yay, or Gene Colan. I mean, no more Gene. But no, it's like, and it's also flattering when somebody calls up and says, "Oh, there was a wonderful artist called Don Newton. Don's been dead like over 30 years, so I think most people don't really remember who he was. But he did the New Gods, Aquaman, and a long run on Batman, inked by Alcala and Dan Atkins. So he did an issue of New Gods that I inked, and I thought Don was wonderful. The stuff was solid. It's sort of like Alex Raymond figures, long, graceful figures with Wally Wood chiaroscuro black and white on them. And so Don just sent me a note saying he loved what I did. And whenever he would have some sort of an outside project, he would hire me to ink it. And whenever I had an outside project, I'd hire him to pencil it. So he came over to Marvel and he did a couple of issues of the Avengers 4. And then he left. And they gave me and Jack Abel 2 issues of that they decided to combine into an annual Avengers Annual 9 or something. And what I found out was Don wanted he wanted it to be contractually understood that I was going to be his inker on every project. And they said, "Well, we can't do that, but we'll just promise you that Rubinstein will ink them." And then when I didn't ink 2 of them, and he got worried that Marvel didn't get him the next script, he went back to DC. So it was all very flattering. And then Don died at age like 52 or something. And even though I was under an exclusive contract to Marvel at the time, I went to Jim Shooter and got dispensation to go over and ink Don's last job, because I was going to be damned if somebody got it wrong. And so I did. And the truth is Roy looked at it, who was the editor-writer, and said, "Well, I don't know, maybe we could use more details. And maybe we should get Alcala." I went, "Oh, no, God, no." It would have been gorgeous, but it wouldn't have been what was drawn. And so I went in with the Xeroxes of the pencils, which I always made first, and said, "Roy, look where I added stuff here. Roy, look where I added stuff here." And so he left it alone. So a couple of times I've inked people who were dead immediately before I inked their stuff. And it's no fun. I mean, it's just awful, like inking this beautiful head by Don and going, "Oh, shit, it's the last time." Or, "Oh, I should call, oh no, he's dead." It's like, it's just heart-wrenching, and I've done it a couple of times. So, I mean, it's one thing if they give me a Jack Kirby piece to do, like a blue line print of it, because Jack's been gone like 30 years. But it's another thing when the guy just passed away and, I'm working on their stuff.
Yeah, that sounds tough.
Yeah.
I'd imagine a lot of emotion in that.
Well, do you remember Bob Brown? He drew Superboy and Batman and Challenge of the Unknown. And he wound up at Marvel, and he had leukemia. And he literally was laying on his deathbed, drawing the last 2 issues, I think, of Marvel Preview Tornado to pay his bills after he died. And Al Milgram, who was a lot more generous than I would have been, decided to hand out 2 pages to people who'd never inked Bob before or will since. So I got to do a little bit of Bob Brown that way. Or I inked Dick Dillon drew a flash cover, and I inked it, and I didn't do it right because I had preconceived notions of what I should be doing. And then he died. And it's, it's regrettable. It's like, see, I think this job should be done this way. And then as the job proceeds, I start getting a pull. Like, no, it should go this way. Stop being stubborn. It should go this way. And then 2 or 3 issues into it, I'm doing it right. But when I did just one Dick Dillon, it was not right. It was okay. It was professional, but it wasn't what I should have done on him. So
you talked a little bit about this when we were discussing Wolverine, which you did finishing inks, I guess they're called, over Frank's layouts,
right?
Which I guess you were a little hesitant on, or maybe you're looking back, with a critical eye. But did you have other assignments, other finishing assignments that you enjoyed more, where you had sort of a heavier hand in that you thought turned out really well, or you were really pleased with?
Well, I'm not sure about a heavier hand, but I mean, I certainly had to make a lot of decisions. But I inked 3 issues of Sal Buscema's Hulk. And I think Ernie Chan had been doing it, and maybe Joe Staten. And Sal's stuff is absolutely, positively, unambiguously there. Unlike John's stuff, which was a lot sketchier and dashed brilliant, but like, ooh, what am I going to do to fill those dots and dashes in? Where Sal it was all ready, but you could do whatever you wanted with it. You had lighting or this or that, the other thing. So I did it, and I tried to do it the best I could. And I mentioned Wade von Grabach earlier. He said that he never understood what inkers did till he saw my issue and compared it to what he'd previously seen on the books, and went, oh, that's what they do. So his work doesn't look a thing like mine, but he was very complimentary to say that I was sort of an inspiration for him. Yeah, I've done layouts with Sal, John on a Red Sonja job. I'm sure other people somewhere, but they stopped doing layouts because the writers got nervous, and not the writers, the editors got nervous. Okay, let's give this job to Inker B. I wonder what's coming back. Let's give this job to C. These pencils are absolutely defined in every physical way. So even if he's a crappy inker, I know what I'm getting back. So the pencilers were more obligated to just get it as tight as possible. And that's what they are. And again, you get somebody really, really good, like Ivan Rios. And I've never inked Ivan Rios, but I bet you I'd be bored because there's absolutely no room to do anything. And I used to ink Kevin McGuire on all the different permutations of the Justice League. And Kevin's an excellent draftsman. And I didn't have to fix a thing. I didn't have to change anything. All I had to do was every now and again, add a little bit of a brush stroke to the hair, a little bit more of a snap to this line or that line, because, you really can't pencil brush work with a pencil. It's a brush. So I would just add a little bit of polish to it. It's the same thing when I did Burns' Captain America. We only did like 9 issues. And a lot of people consider it a career highlight for both of us. And John, in an interview, said that for the first 10 years of his career, he tried to be Neil Adams. And for the second 10 of his career, he tried not to be Neil Adams. So when I got these Captain America pages, they were gorgeous. He was working hard. And I said, I have to live up to this. But because he was into Adams, because I knew Adams in several different definitions, I pushed it like 10% more. And everybody's always loved it. It's like when people take a survey of who's John Byrne's best inker, it's Terry Austin or me or Terry Austin. It's always sort of, do you like the organic or do you like the more structure? So it's a, it's a highlight for me because I just did the very best I could on it.
So moving away from characters, really, but I would love to know, have you moved away from or embraced using digital mediums to do your work, or do you still do it the
I do it.
traditional way?
I do it the height of 13th century technology. You take a tree, you press it flat, and then you take some beetles, you crush them up,
Okay.
and then dip your pen into it.
Got it.
I'm not against it, but I did buy a program for my iPad called Procreate,
Oh yeah.
and on trips to conventions, airplane trips to conventions, I would sit there and I would do drawings and charcoals and color portraits of the Joker and all that sort of stuff. And because I don't know what I'm doing, the charcoal portrait took 4 times as long as if I'd been doing a charcoal portrait. But I also know people like Bill Sienkiewicz. That's Sienkiewicz, not Sienkiewicz. He would do a traditional thing, put it into the computer, and then manipulate things, and whatever it takes, I guess. But yeah, Brent Anderson, who's been doing that excellent Astro City for decades, he's obviously influenced by Adams, and I. And so Brent was thinking of getting me to ink the series. And he told me that he discovered he could draw a cityscape in a quarter of the time on a computer than he could if he'd used a pencil. So you'll notice I haven't inked any of that series. But I've also seen him advertise where he wants to do commissions for people. I don't even think for the money, but so that he has a pen in his hand again and can feel what he's doing, because you miss it after a while. I got to believe that if you're a musician and you play the guitar, you can go to the synthesizer and make it sound like a guitar, but it's showing it playing like the guitar. So.
You mentioned your and Burns' run on Captain America, but I'd love to hear more about what you consider, some of your better projects, whether they're already celebrated or ones that you think people don't talk about that you think should get more attention.
Well, I mean, I think as an overall, the various incarnations of the Justice League, I'm proud of, because the stories were funny and dramatic, and the artwork was wonderful, and everybody cared. Certainly Marvel Universe, for the most part, is something to be proud of. I was on Superman for 7 years through lots of different pencilers. And I was kept on, until the last editor decided to get rid of me. But he was ejected from DC Comics for sexual abuse issues. So let's not go into that. So, but no, I mean, okay. Once again, I've forgotten the question. What was it?
Just talking about some of the work
that
you're most proud of.
Right. Well, one of the things I'm proud of that nobody's ever seen was the late Brian Augustine, who was a very nice guy, hired me to do an 11-page story inside of a graphic novel by Dick Giordano and Terry Austin, published for the American Bible Association, called The Unforgiven. And the 11 pages in the middle is done by Rick Leonardi and myself. And it's just a respectful retelling of the crucifixion. And I had not been getting work for a while because I was perceived of as an old hat, old-fashioned. Nobody knew who I was anymore. Everybody had their own buddy, whatever all the reasons were. And Brian hired me to do this thing. And I said, well, I better ink it in the contemporary look because they're not hiring my old, buying my own stuff. And I went, can't do it. I spent the whole day touching the pen to the paper. I can't do it. Because if it was a second-rate job, which it would have been, I couldn't have defended it. Yeah, I guess, yeah. So I did it the way I felt it should be done. And I think Rick Leonardi liked it, and Brian liked it, and I liked it. And the damn thing never saw print, but I think it was pulped after not too much, because nobody's ever seen it. But if you go to my Comic Art Fans page gallery, there is a gallery that says Bible Story if you want to see it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool. You've done so much, and you already referred to being, called a legend, but do you ever really think about your sort of place in comics history and how much you've contributed? Because it's quite a bit, and it's a legacy that will.
Did I call myself a legend at some point?
You
I
said
don't
you've
think
been.
so.
I thought so. I thought you said you were.
I mean,
You've been, not that you've called yourself a legend.
right. I read that about myself all the time.
Right.
Legendary Joe Rubinstein. Joe Rubinstein, the legend. I have to point out, of course, that Bigfoot is a legend too. Okay, so we have a clubhouse.
But we're seeing you. We're not interviewing Bigfoot, so
behind the curtain. Okay. I had some people who said, "Oh, I follow your inking. I want to be an inker." They'd look at my stuff, and yes, I know that I've done some very seminal work, like the Wolverine miniseries and the Thanos stuff and Infinity Gauntlet. But I didn't know anybody was paying attention. I knew that they were looking at Byrne and not Austin, Byrne and Ron Frank, Kurt Swan, and Buscema. I knew all these people because they're the stars. Inkers are most definitely the supporting cast. They don't get the star treatment, I thought. But I get people coming up to me at conventions a lot going, I've been following your career. Usually, by the way, not usually, but occasionally, there are a big fat guy, bald with a white beard, who says, "I've been looking at your stuff since I was a kid." It's like, so, but there are people. A friend of mine was teaching at the Joe Kubert School, and he said there were students there who didn't know who Mike Golden was, because Mike Golden has not been doing comic books for a very, very long time. So supposedly there's like a 7-year turnaround, like the fans are gone and then a new crop shows up. So Golden hasn't been doing legitimate comic books for a long time, so they don't know who he is. So it would be nice to believe that I have a legacy and somebody's going to refer to me as if that matters when I'm dead. But it's about the now. It's about the work. It's about, I don't look at the page and go, wow, I can hardly wait to be remembered for this. I just do it to do it because I'm going to enjoy the moment. And like anything else in life, there's the past and there's regrets and there's the future and there's anxiety, but it's like now. And so that's what I'm more concerned about. And I just want to do it to enjoy it for the moment.
Makes sense.
So rumor has it that you're quite the painter now.
Yeah, I can paint.
What do you like about that medium versus just doing inking?
If your goal in life is to be a comic book pro, the first day they've hired you, you've met your goal in life. Now what? Right? And if my goal is to be an excellent painter, that's going to take a long time. And how do you define that? And who knows? And so I've been lucky because as a kid, even though I love comic books, I was attracted to the illustrators, the N.C. Wyeths, and Dean Cornwell and people at Lion Decker. And I started to want to be a painter. And as a matter of fact, my mother bought me a painting set when I was like 12 or 13 years old. But, it stank and the brushes were crap. And, it's nothing anybody could actually paint with. So I was really turned off by it. And then when I was 16 years old, I started to attend the High School of Art and Design, which is a vocational school in New York City, like the music and performing school and fame and all that. This was specifically about art. And they were oil painters there, the two guys, Erwin Greenberg and Max Ginsberg. Max is still alive. He's 91 years old. And I'm going to study with him in a week or two on location somewhere because he's better than he's ever been. And a lot of the really top East Coast realists alive today came out of that high school and came out of Max and Greeny's class. So painting's hard, it's color and value and edges and tone and composition and drawing. And And you can do an entire painting with one criteria and then do it again with all the opposite stuff, and it'll still work as long as you stay within the logic of the piece. But the thing is, maybe I shouldn't have done it that way. Maybe I should have done it this way. All right, next time let's do the, hey, let's put these two colors together that aren't supposed to go together. Hey, let's paint a background that's so overwhelming that it'll dominate the figures, but let's see how I can stop the figures from being dominated. So there's always some kind of a project, some sort of an experimenting to do. And you know, it's whether it's egotistical or cocky, I don't think there's any time I sit down in front of a job to ink and think, oh, I hope this goes well. I think it'll go well. It may not be the single greatest thing I've ever done, but I have complete confidence that it will be a professional job when it's done. When I stand or sit in front of a white piece of paper, I go, God, what do I do now? You know, I hope this is not a complete failure. You know, and I was doing a portrait of Bizarro from Superman, and I was doing an experiment, and I put it down, and I looked at it and went, yeah, that's a complete failure. And I put it away, and then I went, maybe. And I pulled it out, and I salvaged it. So that'll keep you busy the rest of your life. Bill Sienkiewicz said to me, the first 10 minutes of a painting are fun. The rest of the time is trying to save it.
And we're back. How about that interview, guys? Joe and I, Joe Marcello that is, really enjoyed sitting down with Joe Rubinstein. He is a great guest. Love to hear all of the stories, and just love to hear, you know, from all the different corners of the mostly Marvel universe that he has inked. And what else can you say? I mean, he's in the Joe Sinnott Hall of Fame. He's a continuing inker. I love to hear about his new sort of side hustle, if you want to call it, about painting. I mean, he's become a fabulous painter as well. So all in all, great guest, great artist.
Yeah, you guys did a phenomenal job. I'm sorry I missed this one. I think I was away for the week, but what a talent and a true artist. You know, like you said, with painting now as well as inking. He loves art. It shows in what he talks and how he speaks about the medium. So a great interview, guys. Phenomenal job.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for rating, reviewing, subscribing. Thank you for supporting us as a member of the Dollar Bin Boosters. You know where to go, buzzsprout.dollarbinbandits.com. And we will see you for the next episode. That's it. Bye.